Hey, what's up guys? It's Geb here. You know, there are a lot of game franchises that fill me with a ton of nostalgia, and I've kind of been in the mood to talk about them recently. Kingdom Hearts, The Legend of Zelda, Ratchet & Clank, and Super Smash Bros. Are just a few of the series that I grew up with that really helped shape me into the person I am today, and joining that company is everybody's favorite blue dumpster fire, Sonic the Hedgehog. See, I was fortunate enough to grow up owning a Dreamcast, and while I didn't own too many games for the consoles, two of them I did have were the Sonic Adventure games, and I also had Sonic Heroes for the GameCube. And these games were absolutely amazing.
Oh no! Give it your best shot!
Well, they're pretty rough by today's standards, but man, back in the early 2000s, this franchise was the absolute best in my opinion. Until they gave Shadow a gun. And made Sonic have adventures in a storybook world. And turn him into a werewolf. And kiss a human. What happened to this franchise? While it's true that Sonic Frontiers has been seen with mostly positive praise recently, and the Sonic movies have really brought the stock up for the Hedgehog, that doesn't exactly erase the near 2-decade-long span of inconsistent garbage that Sega had put out before. Yeah, during this time you had your standouts like Colors, Generations, and of course Mania, but the vast majority of things related to Sonic between 2003 to today was okay at best, and just completely god-awful at worst. So today I want to take a look back at the franchise beginnings all the way back to 1991 for the original Sonic the Hedgehog. And man, when talking about Sonic's origins, there's some really interesting stuff to cover. See, Sonic the Hedgehog was a creature born from pure hatred. Sega's hatred for Nintendo to be exact. The Genesis at the time was doing okay, but was basically no competition to Nintendo's NES. And with the SNES on the horizon, Sega were scrambling to create a mascot character that could rival Mario. Internally at Sega, there was a contest being held in order to come up with the design for such a character. Numerous ideas were thrown around, from a rabbit that could pick up stuff with their ears, to an armadillo, a squirrel, a kangaroo. They even had a mustached man that would soon be turned into Dr. Eggman, but they eventually settled on a blue hedgehog named Sonic that was created by Naoto Oshima. So actually designing Sonic as a character was rather interesting. They settled on the darker shade of blue in order to have him match the Sega logo and to stand out from some of the backgrounds, which makes sense, but they also essentially pulled different aspects of some of the most recognizable figures in the world. Felix the Cat's head, Mickey Mouse's gloves, Michael Jackson's shoe buckles, and the red and white color scheme for Santa Claus. It's literally just missing Jesus Christ's robes, Albert Einstein's hair, and yeah, actually maybe Sega was right to stop where they're at. Sega had their own interesting ideas too, like apparently they threw around the idea of Sonic being in a band, having vampire teeth, and even having a human girlfriend. Yeah, Sega deadass inadvertently created the prototype for MGK back in the late 80s, and even back then they saw how fucking stupid that was and decided not to do it. On the programming side of things, Sega enlisted Yuji Naka from Phantasy Star fame in order to head the project. Naka was a big fan of the Super Mario Bros. Games, but always felt that they could be played a little bit faster. Combined with the speed-inspired character design of Sonic, it seemed like Naka and Oshima were a match made in heaven. Eventually, others would join the development process too, which, while helpful, didn't stop the developers from working nearly 19 hours a day to see this game's completion. Sonic Team had quite a number of goals they wanted to see with this project, from having a game be playable with only one button, to being the fastest character speed ever seen up to that point, to pushing that sweet blast processing to its limit with the game's graphics. Sega wanted this to essentially be the Mario killer. That being said, there were numerous obstacles with Sonic 1's development, most notably with the massive amount of redesigns that needed to be done with the game's levels. Like, it took Naka over 8 months to develop Green Hill just by itself, with how many times he started from scratch. Which, looking at the levels from Mario compared to Sonic, yeah, I get that these are far more complex, but still 8 months for one level is insane. Not to mention all the performance issues that existed with getting the background to properly scroll, having a stable frame rate, the sprite flickering, the numerous animation issues. Hell, there was even a cut multiplayer component that we wouldn't see come back until Sonic 2. You guys probably understand how this works by now. The game gets concepted, goes through absolute hell for development, and then it somehow miraculously turns out to be pretty good. And I'm happy to say Sonic the Hedgehog is no exception to this. Sonic the Hedgehog was released in June of 1991 to American audiences on the Genesis, and about a month later to European and Japanese audiences on the Mega Drive, if you want to get all serious about this. This game was essentially the thing that took the Genesis from being a very distant second place to not only being competitive with Nintendo, but even gapping them in the European market. Sonic the Hedgehog was a best-selling game in 1991 with 2 million units sold worldwide, and eventually sold 24 million units in total. The game was so popular that it actually started to get bundled with Genesis consoles, which ultimately helped sell an additional 15 million console units. Hell, if you owned a Genesis before Sonic 1 came out, you could actually get in contact with Sega and have them mail you a copy of the game. Like what a weird fucking concept. It clearly worked, however, as Sonic 1 earned numerous Game of the Year awards from a number of publications, and audiences absolutely adored it. Many actually saying they prefer what Sonic had to offer over Mario. As it stands today, next to maybe Doom and Tetris, Sonic the Hedgehog might be one of the games that we've seen the most ports out of any game I can think of. You of course had the Genesis original, the 8-bit Master System and Game Gear versions, the numerous re-releases across various collections and online storefronts, this piece of shit, the updated 2013 mobile port, a 3D version for the 3DS, and probably something ported to a TI-83 or a smart fridge or something by this point, I don't know. I first experienced the classic games on the Sonic Mega Collection back on the GameCube, and these games would be something that I would continually come back to with Sonic's alternate Genesis Collection to the Steam releases, but now my opinion on the definitive way to play these games is on the Sonic Origins Collection. I mean, it has widescreen support, gets rid of the life system, giving the players unlimited continues, includes a spin dash and drop dash from later games, which is a huge difference. You can play as Super Sonic, and you can also play as other characters including Tails, Knuckles, and even Amy. You could also choose to play the game in its original Genesis state, or play it in a boss rush mode, or even a mirrored version of the game. Yeah, it kind of sucks that they delisted the Steam releases, so this is the only way you can really play these games legally now. But I still do think this is the best way to experience this title. And this is going to be how I'm viewing the game today, but since I highlighted the main additions to this collection, I'll mainly be focusing on what has been mostly kept the same since the original release. So what was it that Sega did that made Sonic such a household name? What were some of the key gameplay features that made its debut in this game that we see later on throughout the series? And does this game hold up today? Well, let's talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. On South Island, the evil Dr. Robotnik, or Eggman if you want to get all serious about this, has been kidnapping animals in order to encase them into evil robot badniks and capsules in order to attempt to steal the 6 Chaos Emeralds. You're Sonic the Hedgehog. Stop him. Yeah, standard platformer fare here. I do have to say I think the whole nature versus machine theme is kind of neat, and it's something that exists throughout the rest of the series, but this plot doesn't really get much more deep than that. No, Sonic is all about the gameplay and the audio and visual department, and let me get all my praise with the graphics and sound out of the way first. I think this game, even to this day, is an absolute marvel to the senses. First off, the animations are awesome and incredibly expressive, especially for 1991 standards. Sonic reaching his top speed, teetering on a ledge, or getting an air bubble to stay alive add a lot of personality to the character that was pretty uncommon for platformers at the time. Same thing with the enemies. The animations are a little bit more limited here, but the art design behind how unique these things are is super cool. Like, look at this dopey fucking caterpillar, or these angry fish, or this motherfucker who constantly rushes on the screen like a 16-bit jump scare. And the levels themselves, man, what a visual marvel. The color palette is absolutely stellar, with each zone having its own identity within its setting. The lush landscapes of Green Hill, the cool colors of Marble Zone, and especially the vibrance of Spring Yard Zone all stand out in my mind. Then there are the special zones, which kind of feel like an acid-fueled drug trip, and they can be a little bit disorienting, but I think they're mostly fine, and at the time, they were pretty graphically impressive. Giving the zones probably the most identifiable aspects has to be the music though. Everyone knows the music for Green Hill Zone by now, but honestly, this whole soundtrack is full of bangers. You have the Genesis twang-riddled tracks for Marble Zone and Labyrinth Zone, the funkiness of Spring Yard Zone, the absolute bop of a fucking track that is Starlight Zone, my personal favorite, and also the absolute nerve-wracking melody of the drowning music that still haunts me to this very day. The audio design in general is also just superb. Think about how many earworm sound effects are in this game. Collecting rings, jumping on enemies, getting an air bubble, jumping off a spring, hitting a goalpost. It's all great stuff. Now onto the gameplay, the real meat and potatoes, or in Sonic's case, chili dogs, of the package. Sonic the Hedgehog looks to be your standard 2D platformer, requiring him to run across a myriad of levels, killing enemies, as well as avoiding and jumping over obstacles. Pretty familiar stuff within the genre, even at the time. Now what Sonic does differently, and what everyone knows Sonic for, was the emphasis on speedy, momentum-based platforming. Unlike many other platformers at the time, Sonic gains speed gradually as he moves, and combined with the game's focus on physics in regards to running up slopes, it does require Sonic to be moving at a brisk pace in order to make it to the end of the stage. There will often be long straightaways where the game almost feels like it's playing itself, but it's honestly pretty exhilarating. And it makes the areas where you have to pay attention and avoid obstacles even more intense because you are encouraged to keep that speed going. Obstacles are aplenty too, because Sonic will have to contend with many things such as bottomless pits, spikes, and an army of badniks under Robotnik's control. The enemies in this game aren't too aggressive, with most only moving back and forth with occasionally shooting projectiles. The only ones that gave me a little bit of trouble were the caterpillars because of how wonky their hitboxes were, or the Orbinauts because of how often they would surround themselves with spikes. It doesn't help that this is the first Sonic game, and the only way Sonic really has to contend with these enemies is jumping into them or rolling into a ball while running. I mean, it's serviceable enough, but with later games in the series having such things such as the spin dash and the homing attack, it really does make the first game feels like it's missing something. This is again why I prefer playing the Origins version. It just really fixes this issue entirely. Now, when Sonic is moving through the level, he will continually pick up rings. And while this game does what many other platformers at the time did by using them to get extra lives or adding to your high score, the game takes it a step further by also having the rings act as Sonic's hit points in a way. See, if he does take damage from either an enemy or a stage hazard without any rings, it's an instant death. However, if Sonic has at least one ring, instead of dying, Sonic will instead drop all of his rings, which will bounce around the stage momentarily, giving him a chance to pick them up. I think this is a very fun mechanic that can add a lot of urgency to whatever the situation Sonic might be in, especially in the case of boss fights. Though, no matter the amount of rings, falling into a bottomless pit, being crushed, or drowning will result in an instant death, which can be rather annoying. More on that in a minute. The rings have another purpose as well, because if Sonic completes one of the first 2 acts of his zone while carrying at least 50 rings, he can enter a special stage for a chance to get some extra lives and a gem.
You mean the Chaos Emeralds?
I mean, I guess if that's what you want to call them, even though they aren't all green and there are only 6 of them in this game. Anyways, these special stages are, they're alright, I guess. They're not that hard, but they're a little janky. So you have to make it through this maze while it's constantly turning to get to the area where the Chaos Emerald is. Which isn't the worst thing in the world, but there are a few exit spots you might accidentally touch that make you leave the special stage and head into the next act. Thankfully in the Origins collection, you have the option to use a continue on these special stages to give you another attempt. And the game showers you with these continues, so it really becomes a non-factor. What are the Chaos Emeralds for? Really just to get the good ending, and that really only amounts to just a slight change to the ending screen. I mean, in the Origins collection, you are able to play as Super Sonic, which is pretty fun, but I didn't really care much for going after these. Outside of gathering rings, Sonic can also find numerous power-ups spread throughout the level. There are ring boxes to give him stacks of 10 rings, shields that allow Sonic to take an extra hit, shoes to temporarily increase Sonic's speed, as well as an invincibility power-up to allow him to bypass enemies and stage hazards. These are scattered around the levels in somewhat hidden locations, encouraging the players to explore each level to see what secrets they might find. And now for probably the most defining trait about Classic Sonic, the level design. Classic Sonic levels are known for their deep construction behind their zones, multiple pathways with higher routes offering more rewards while the lower routes offer more dangers, hidden goodies throughout, interesting boss fights at the end of each zone, and most notably high-speed momentum-based platforming. And it all got its start with the first Sonic game, and in many ways, it really feels like the first Sonic game. Okay, it's not all bad, but given my context with later entries in the series, there are just some level ideas that I don't think pan out super well. Pacing-wise, the game gives each zone 3 acts with a boss fight following the third. Now, while most levels can be completed in less than a minute if you know what you're doing, I still feel like 3 acts is a little too much time to be spending with these level tropes, as these themes and main gimmicks of each honestly start to wear pretty thin. And I know that Sonic 2 and 3 have longer but fewer acts that may actually have more playtime in them in total, but dividing the zones into 3 parts just feels longer, you know? Other than that, my issues are really only on a zone-by-zone basis. Like, I think Green Hill Zone is a perfect introductory level. There are tons of alternate paths to get players interested in exploration. Next is 0 instant kill pits or crushers. The enemies are pretty simple, but are still capable of getting the better of you. An excellent introductory boss that sets the stage for later encounters. And of course, tons of high-speed sections to make the player's pants a little bit tighter. Each level can be completed in less than a minute, so this zone really flies by. And then it comes to a screeching halt in Marble Zone. This becomes apparent when you first encounter the Crushers, because not only can they instantly kill you, they constantly make you stop moving because they are timed in a way to prevent rushing through. Then you have the blocks that require you to push them to open up paths. The lava across several floors that spews fire, the slow-ass moving blocks that need to be ridden to move across said lava pools, assuming there aren't any invincibility power-ups nearby. Basically no alternative pathways to avoid this shit. And not a ton of loose rings available, so if you get hit halfway through the level, you probably won't have enough to reach the special zone. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this one. There's just too much start-stop shit for my liking, which if I'm playing Tails or Knuckles in the Origins collection isn't as much of an issue, but in a normal playthrough, it's a total pace breaker. At least the boss is pretty decent. The next level is thankfully almost the opposite of that start-stop bullshit with Spring Yard Zone. No, this zone has the bounce you all over the place and slide into an iron spike ball type of bullshit. What the fuck? Actually, I think this level is pretty good. There are plenty of alternate pathways, a lot of rings to make getting the special stages super doable, but they also have some speedy platforming sections that ask the player to still pay a little more attention to keep the pace up. The boss, though, can go fuck itself. No, it's not that bad. Just a little janky with its hitbox, and the instant kill stuff is kind of bullshit. Then we have Labyrinth Zone. So Labyrinth Zone is the game's water level. Thankfully, there are a couple alternate pathways to avoid some of the water, but man, you aren't getting away dry with this one, let me tell you what. There are plenty of instances where you are going to be forced to traverse the water, and in all cases, it sucks. Water in this game slows Sonic's speed, and makes us have to collect air bubbles to make sure he doesn't drown. So, take what I didn't like with Marble Zone, you know, the waiting around, and now also include the ever-looming threat of instant death if I don't manage to suck down a bubble. The boss of the stage, if you can even call it that, is just following Robotnik through a short passageway of water with spears and fireballs being tossed at you. Even worse, if you die here, there aren't any rings to grab to help you take any extra hits on this, only an extra shield, which makes this a little bit more annoying than it really needs to be. Yeah, Labyrinth Zone blows. And because Sonic 1's levels are bipolar as fuck, next we have a zone that I think is probably my second favorite, Starlight Zone. Or, excuse me, Starlight Zone. Important distinction to make, trust me. So Starlight Zone is another high-speed zone with the central gimmick being built around these fans that can push Sonic in a particular direction, and the seesaws, which still slow the pace down a little bit, but hey, at least you're actually moving back and forth on these things to progress. These are actually the things that you use to damage the boss too, and I think these actually make for a pretty inventive fight. Next is Scrap Brain Zone, and if my pattern recognition skills are to be correct, this is probably going to be another bullshit level. So we spawn in and run forward and yep, look at that, an instant kill pit 3 feet away from our start. Love to see it. Yeah, this level is filled with plenty of things that will kill you easily. Forget about the flamethrowers and lightning balls that will shoot projectiles at you. Now your biggest enemy are the conveyor belts and the moving platforms that will crush you on those conveyor belts. These are incredibly annoying and require some decently precise timing in order to pass. The flywheels I think are a pretty fun way to test the player's timing as they're running on them, and I think the elevators are cool for making the level seem bigger than it is, but then we get to Act 3, which... oh, you gotta be joking. The water trope was worn out by the second act of Labyrinth Zone. Who at Sonic Team decided we needed a fourth act for this zone? Well, the final zone of the game sees us in the final zone. Alright, we found where Sonic Team has officially stopped trying. And this is just one final fight with Robotnik in these piston-like machines that, while it can be a little nerve-wracking not having any rings, I think the boss fight does a fair enough job of making it not too much of an issue. Every attack is telegraphed to give the player plenty of time to react, and once the final blow is dealt to Robotnik, the game ends and we see the results of our actions. See? I told you I wasn't going to go after the Chaos Emeralds. Fine, I went ahead and did it as Tails just because it was going to be less of a burden anyway. But yeah, that is essentially Sonic the Hedgehog, so what did I think of it?
Hey, that's pretty good.
Well, aside from my relentless bitching about things I didn't like in the level design, I think Sonic 1 is a really good time. Don't get me wrong, when it comes to the mainline 2D Sonic games, it sits pretty close to the bottom for me. We don't talk about that one. No, when comparing Sonic 1 to CD, 2, 3 and K, and Mania, I can't help but see this game come up short to every one of those other games in nearly every way. I think the level design in those games is better, there's more content to enjoy, and those games have a better idea of what a 2D Sonic game should really be. That being said, I still really enjoy Sonic 1, and I think it is absolutely worth your time. The levels that are fun are really fun, and the music and the art design are among the best in the 16-bit era. And man, when you get into a flow of moving fast and clearing zones at blistering speeds, that just feels good, man. And there aren't too many other games that can provide that type of experience. It's far from a perfect game, but if you have the ability to experience it, and you are a fan of the 2D platformer genre, I think this is a very good game to give a shot, especially on the Origins collection, which again, really brings it a little more close to par with the other games in the franchise. Give it a shot if you're curious. I think you'll probably have some fun. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for watching. What were your favorite memories of Sonic the Hedgehog? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving it a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again. I'll catch you in the next video.